With the Investing News Network, I'm Scott Tibbles. Today, I'm having a chat with Remi Piet, who is Senior Director at America's Market Intelligence. Thank you for joining me, Remi.
Hi Scott, how you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. So, over the past few weeks, we have spent quite a lot of time talking about Bolivia. Now, there's been quite a lot of developments over the weekend. So, just to date this interview, we're conducting this on Tuesday, November the 12th. Bolivian President Evo Morales is out. Morales, who had been president of Bolivia for almost 14 years, was unceremoniously resigned this weekend after protests over a disputed election result. According to official numbers, which had been questioned by neighboring countries, Morales had won the first round of voting in the October presidential election outright, but that was after counting initially pointed towards the need for a runoff election. Counting was put on hold, and then Morales was declared outright winner soon afterwards, triggering unrest. So, Remi, we have touched on Bolivia quite extensively in previous weeks, as I've mentioned. First, the result of the election, which was pointing towards the runoff, and then the fallout of the unrests. Previously, you've said that the country both punches below its weight relative to its immense potential, and both candidates, being Evo Morales and Carlos Mesa, were pro mining. What can you tell me a little bit now? What has happened in just the last few days?
Well, it's a very unstable situation, obviously politically, in terms of what are going to be the next steps, and potentially a new elections. The latest news is that there's going to be attempts at organizing another election before January 22nd, which was supposed to be the date where the new president was supposed to take office. But it's still very unclear. We don't know yet, as of today, who's going to be the interim president. In terms of the constitution, should have been the vice president will also resign. The president of the Senate, the vice president of the Senate, both of them resign also. So he would be the second vice president of the Senate. So number 5th in the order of the constitution that might step in. She's a member of the opposition, so she will not resign on this occasion, but she needs to have the support of the Congress and Senate to actually be able to organize the upcoming elections. Now, this is the situation in terms of the political scene and the most recent news. That doesn't change a series of different variables and elements that I mentioned in past interviews, especially in terms of the potential for mining investment. Indeed, there's very strong potential and reserves in a series of minerals, whether you're looking at silver, you're looking at copper, lithium, and the Morales administration had been, supporting some limited foreign investment, especially from Canadian firms such as First Majestic Silver or Pan American Silver, but we were very far from the potential of the country on this. When you actually look at what could have been achieved under Morales' past administration and what he was actually planning on developing, there's been a series of mining reforms under Morales in his third term, with the objective of encouraging additional investment in the country, and that was actually the mandate that was in the hands of Cesar Navarro, the current mining minister, who actually just resigned also. If it had been Carlos Mesa that won the elections, Carlos Mesa was also supporting mining in terms of a way forward and a need for the country's economy. So both aisle of the political spectrum actually are pro mining candidates, and in the attempt to generate foreign investment and foreign currency where you actually export minerals outside of the country. Now, obviously, we are entering a great instability right now. It's unclear if Morales is still planning to attend that running for the January 22nd election, if that date is confirmed in the coming days. But we will probably have to see if Carlos Mesa is the clear favorite for this new round of elections. It's very hard to get a real grip on how much of a rigging there was in this election. Obviously, Morales had prepared all the circumstances for a terrible situation by going against the referendum that prevented him from changing constitution and preventing him from running for a fourth term. It still went beyond this referendum by having some kind of a weird ruling by a judge in the country saying that it was his human rights to actually run for election, which was a very weird decision on this one. But his position of running for a fourth election has definitely been seen by the electorate as a drift towards authoritarianism. Sorry for that, and that's what's been sanctioned by some of his former supporters. But when we're looking at the official results of the first round of the elections, no one was actually really criticizing the fact that Morales was leading on the first round. The question was more on the question of margin that would actually have allowed him to not have to run for a second round of this election. And the reason is that a large part of the population still supports Morales. Morales has done a good job when you're looking at the economy of Bolivia, with an economy that has over the last 12 13 years achieved good results of an average of 4% growth in the country. And you see a country which is very much very dynamic and has seen and shown the capacity to have a series of projects moving forward, and capacity. You still have a very well trained, especially in the regions of Santa Cruz de la Sierra, trained business minded society, and you have the capacity with, especially in the mining sectors, of a history of the country and a series of miners and workforce that are eligible and capable of running a mine. Now there was issues of how you would actually develop a project under Morales, working especially with cooperatives and different local actors. But that was possible. And that's, as I was saying, was has been a success with the first steps of First Majestic Silvers and Pan American Silver. If Carlos Mesa or the right wing actually arrives in power next year, then we're very much likely to see Bolivia as a new Ecuador, if I can use this image of a country that has reformed step by step its economy and opened up to foreign investment. And as much as Ecuador was the darling child of investors in the mining sectors over the last 2 to 3 years, that could very well be the case in Bolivia over the next 3 years, because the potential is definitely there.
Okay, and so I really want to get back to the mining potential, but let's just stay with the politics for one more question. So, given that that's where so much of the mainstream media attention has been going, do you think that is there going to be an orderly transition of power? What, or I guess a better question is, what would the next few weeks look like in Bolivia, given there's been so much chaos in the media so far?
Yeah, it's not only in the media, in the streets also. I mean, we're looking at a situation which is very unstable right now. And Morales was probably surprised to see that the police forces actually very quickly turned their back to his authority. You had very violent outbursts of in the streets from demonstrators that directly targeting some key members of the government. I mean, Luis Alberto Sanchez, the oil minister, Cesar Nevato from the mining minister, quickly renounced their positions, especially because some of them had seen their family being threatened. Some of their properties and houses were set on fire. And so you've seen very violent reaction from well organized groups that was actually adamantly opposed to the result of perceived rigged elections. And that's why Morales was actually um, very outspoken talking about a coup, because I mean it's quite impressive to see the strong reaction from the streets, and the fact that some key members of the establishment were directly targeted by this. So now the first steps is really to try to get some pacified situation in the streets. Now that Morales left the country to Mexico, that is likely to be an interim president to set up a new, let's say, a calendar for upcoming elections. The question is whether or not the police and the army will be able to pacify the streets. We're seeing reactions from the pro Morales part of the country. Morales is extremely popular in the rural areas, in Altiplano also, and some areas of La Paz is not as popular in Cochabamba and especially Santa Cruz de la Sierra, even if is actually originally from Cochabamba. But we've seen a potential outbreak of violence from Morales supporters over the next coming weeks, because they will actually claim that was a coup. So the question becomes, now a little bit further down the road, a week or 2 weeks from now, Will we have some kind of an agreement between what is left of the mass, Morales party in Congress, giving the authority to this, second vice president of the Senate to be interim president, agreeing to some kind of a timetable for the next elections, probably with the Organization of American States that was originally invited by Morales to do an audit, and that clearly underlined a series of fraud of the elections. This is what we're going to be very much witnessing in next coming weeks. I still feel that Bolivia is not a country which is, you can't compare Bolivia with Venezuela, you can't compare Bolivia with Nicaragua. It's a country which is much different in terms of the composition of its population. There's 36 different nations in Bolivia. It's a very strong, let's say, patchwork of different communities, and they actually, despite regular demands from a series of different regions, especially the region of Santa Cruz for more autonomy, there has been some kind of a, let's say, regular and orderly conduct of different provinces towards a national path towards of institutions. And I think this is what we're going to see, probably a runoff for new elections. That January 22nd date is probably the one that will be confirmed. Cesar Mesa will be back on the poll, and the question will be who will be representing the Morales party, since Morales will probably not run for this election, but will likely try to be represented by another representative of his party. What he should have probably done at the end of his third term, and allow for democratic transition, a transition that leads to another member of his party for the next administration.
Okay, so you've said that we can't really compare Bolivia with Venezuela, but you have compared it positively to Ecuador. Would it be fair to say that with a new regime, could Bolivia be described as effectively an all-new mining jurisdiction in South America for investors to look at? I mean, I know that you have talked extensively about needing to know about how Bolivia operates, but by the looks of it, that operating system is now gone.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I'm very cautious and always mention that Bolivia should not be compared with Venezuela or Nicaragua or Ecuador. And all those countries are very much different in terms of their history. There's a tendency from observers that are not very knowledgeable of the particularities of each country and each region to try to put them in the same category because they're member of ALBA. They're perceived as blind supporters of Cuba and anti-American countries. I mean, this is a very simplistic vision of those countries because each one of them has different history. We're looking specifically at Bolivia and Morales as a leader. Morales is not is an indigenous leader. That was really how he grew in power before his arrival to power in 2006. He took control of the mass through the workers' union and Cocaleros movement inside Bolivia, and he actually was able to get control of the state after you know winning and absolutely fairly in the elections by 60% in the first round. The second time they was running against Gonzalo Sanchez de Lozada, a regime that was heavily corrupt, with a series of agreements with oil industries and gas industries that were very much only in favor of foreign investors and really didn't give much to the state. What he has done when he actually come into power was he nationalized the energy sector, but he didn't do any kind of expropriation of companies. It was just a renegotiation, a strong renegotiation. Obviously, and some companies that were investing in Bolivia would have preferred to stay with the terms of the original contract. But that was some kind of a we're very far away from the expropriation or the occupation of foreign companies that we've seen over the last few years in Venezuela. The perception of the situation in Bolivia was really the organization of a model that was more geared towards creation of value in the country, having a better deal for the national state on the negotiations of different contracts, a federalization of different communities and not a centralized country only in the end of one key leader, as it was the case before the arrival of Morales. So it was much more of the centralized nature of the state with the different 36 different regions and communities. And so we far away from this vision of a very centralized, extremely corrupt state in the hands of a communist-minded country. It's more an indigenous-minded leader with a series of different institutional rules that were targeting at creating more values in the country, of not only turning towards being an extractive industries country without any kind of transformation in the country. So it was very interesting to look at, how some deals could be stricken in lithium or in silver with a key component of local content, a key component of transformation inside the country, which is something that sometimes in some countries, especially in Africa or some very underdeveloped jurisdictions, also in Latin America, is missing in terms of trying to create value for the country. Now, what does that mean in terms of the way forward? We have a country, as I was saying, that has experienced strong growth over the last 15 years. The level of poverty has been slashed by two under Morales. There are, as I was saying, there was no purge of the elite. Of the business and entrepreneurial elite, especially in the areas of Santa Cruz and some areas of La Paz, like we've seen in Venezuela under the Chavez years, and even more under the Moreno years, so the Maduro years, sorry for that, where you had a max exodus of the well-trained and business-minded people outside of the country. There are some clear potentiality for partnership inside Bolivia. And if we're looking at an orderly transition over the next few weeks and months, it's going to take some months, then there's still very strong potential towards being able, under the right kind of reforms in the mining sector, in the energy sector. Those reforms have already been started by the last Morales administration to actually increase the amount of potential for foreign investment in the mining industry, especially, and following the step, as I was saying, First Majestic Silver or Pan American Silver that have been showing the capacity to start developing operations and trying to work with a new incoming and more stabilized administration, much as what we've seen in Ecuador, for example, where Lenin Moreno, steadily drifted towards more, let's say, right winging or center left politics after Korea, and that has been a very strong incentive for foreign investors, especially from Australia, but other countries, to actually invest in key projects in Ecuador. There again, you're going to have the issue of how do you work with indigenous communities, how do you work with local cooperatives and informal miners. These are things that you have to work on a case by case basis, looking at the specific mining project and what are the key stakeholders on the side. But that's something that we've seen, and we are well aware of how to integrate, to operate in Bolivia as in other countries in Latin America, and we can definitely help any investors in there.
Okay, and so speaking of commodities, so you've talked about copper, lithium, and silver. Are these commodities that Bolivia could potentially lead the world in, or be a part of, like top 10, top 5 producers, similar to Ecuador and Peru and Chile when it comes to copper?
Well, you also have gold. I mean, you have another series of different mineral potential in the country. I mean, you're looking at a country which its geology is very similar to the one in northern Chile or southern Peru. I mean, this triangle around the Atacama Desert, the Salar de Bolivia, and so on, are really areas that are probably incomparable to any other places in the world in terms of the potential for the resources and the potential for mineral reserves. There's definitely a lack in terms of exploration in the country. A lot of the areas have been, worked on by cooperatives that have limited technology and limited power to actually analyze deep in the ground in terms of the capacity of reserves. But that's why I've been, mentioning for a few months with you the untapped potential of Bolivia in terms of the reserves that are likely to be seen in the country. If you actually understand clearly how to operate with the different stakeholders and different political powers, both the new ones at the national level, but more importantly at the regional and local level, then if you're able to develop a very successful operation. And as I will turn again to some of the companies that are already operating there, and that can be very good case studies to analyze.
And what are some of the major companies that are there? Although I guess a better question would be, what are some of the smaller companies that are there? You've mentioned Pan American Silver and also First Majestic.
Well, Pan American Silver is a rather big company, a mining company with the operations all across the world. They bought Tower Resources recently, so they now have stronger operations in Peru and also in Guatemala. Pan American Silver is actually a partner with Silvercorp inside First Majestic Silver, who's still at the exploration stage, but has very much, with a good management team, moved forward towards uh, an operation in Bolivia. Those are, I mean, as one of the issue that Bolivia was facing was definitely an issue of lack of financing, because of the Morales administration. The fact that, first of all, is not usually on the first level of targets on any radar for investors, but also of the positioning politically of Bolivia in terms of geopolitics in Latin America. Most banking actors or large funds have been kind of shy or clearly decided not to look at Bolivia as the potential area for financing of operations. But that's where you might actually see the key difference in the coming weeks and years, is that if you have very similarly to what we've seen over the last 2 years in Ecuador, if you have a regime in the capital that starts opening up to foreign investments, exactly like Lenin Moreno did in Ecuador by going to Davos, going to talk to the IMF. That has been obviously with some issues recently in Ecuador. But if you have this liberalization of the economy, then definitely that's an area where the pioneers and those that are understanding of the capacity to successfully develop a mining operation in Bolivia and are not frightened to just follow the pack and are ready to just try to invest in a new jurisdiction, there's clear opportunity for investment. And similarly, as you're seeing a very successful Fruta del Norte potentially on Cascabel in Ecuador, you do have the very same potential in Bolivia, in what is probably an even more interesting jurisdiction in terms of geology because of the similarities with the Atacama Desert on north of Chile.
Okay, so Bolivia offers up similar offerings to its neighbors in Argentina, Peru, and Chile. So if I were a investor that was just taking a first look at Bolivia, what should I be doing? What should I be looking into? And how long should I be waiting before I, well, throw my hat into the ring?
Well, it very much depends on what kind of investors you are. Obviously, I mean, any mining major right now should have already some kind of monitoring of opportunities in Bolivia, and trying to clearly understand what are the new actors that will take power over the next few weeks. Clearly, because of the potential of the country here. If you're a smaller junior miner, then you probably want to look at what other exploration companies have been able to do in Bolivia, and try to waiting obviously for a few weeks for the new administration to be put in place, but try to understand the best practices of both First Majestics and Pan American Silver on this one. And if you're an individual investor, and clearly um, there's a change and peaceful democratic transition in Bolivia. That's a big if, but I'm quite confident that this will happen over the next few weeks and months. Then I'd be very interested in looking at potential acquisition and or partnering with existing companies in Bolivia. I mean, goes through a very strong due diligence process. Obviously, a counterparty risk assessment that you have to do with people that are very knowledgeable of the situation in Latin America in general, in Bolivia in particular, and in the specific vicinity of potential mines that you're looking at potentially operating or acquiring or partnering with in terms of your options in Bolivia. But that's probably one jurisdictions where you don't want to be the last one to jump on board, and 5 years from now look at the situation and say, well, if I had been a little bit more brave and spontaneous, I might have just worked with experts of Bolivia or Latin American mining, and try to see what would have been the best opportunity, and I would have probably taken a position that proved to be very successful down the road.
Fantastic. Well, I think that we will leave it on that note. Thank you so much for giving me a rundown on the situation in Bolivia, Remi.
It's my pleasure, Scott.
And that was Remi Piet, Senior Director at America's Market Intelligence. I'm Scott Tibbles with the Investing News Network. You can find us at investingnews.com and feel free to follow us at Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Thanks for listening.